Pulling off a satisfying final season for a long-running series is one of the most difficult feats to achieve in television, with significantly more shows fumbling at the final hurdle. And with Amazon Prime's The Boys being one of the most beloved shows of recent years, it means that the viewers have had high expectations going into the final season. And as the weeks have gone by, the reaction has been, well, let's say mixed, with some going as far as calling it a complete failure, something that I totally disagree with. So in today's video, I'm going to be diving into the final season of The Boys and explaining why I believe the internet is wrong about it. And just for a heads up, this discussion will contain major spoilers. So, Season 4 left us in an incredibly bleak position, with the newly elected president swearing loyalty to Homelander. Martial law was declared, with Supes legally empowered to run the country under the control of Homelander, and any dissidents were rounded up and sent to freedom camps, including Huey, Mother's Milk, and Frenchie. Starlight was able to escape, so is now on the run, whilst the powered up Butcher has the Supe killing virus, with him plotting genocide against all Supes. So this season focuses on the resistance against Homelander's tyranny, as the boys work together to finally put down this maniacal figure once and for all. And let's start off with the biggest strength of this season and the driving force of this entire series: Homelander. This character has been absolute gold since we were first introduced to him. He's such a complex and layered villain that manages to be equally menacing whilst utterly pathetic. He's the definition of a narcissist and a monster, but he's just so captivating that you're glued to the screen whenever he turns up. There are lots of good characters in The Boys, but if we're being honest, Homelander overshadows everyone. And the main reason for that is due to Anthony Starr's immense portrayal of the character. I was a fan of the actor before this, as I really enjoyed Banshee, which he was tremendous in, but this role has elevated his stardom to another level, and it's completely deserved. He deserves to have won an Emmy for his performance, so the fact that he's never even been nominated is absolutely criminal. This is one of the greatest villains in television history, largely due to his iconic performance, so I hope that he finally receives some awards recognition. Something that I've always loved about The Boys is its deranged sense of humour. Its gross out elements and shock factor are what The Boys is especially known for, but this season they didn't quite hit like they used to, because at this point I've seen some of the craziest shit possible. So seeing a dude attack someone with his literal ballsack doesn't get the same response from me anymore. But what I did find particularly funny was the dialogue this season. There were so many great lines that had me chuckling all throughout. It felt to me like they spent a lot of time in the writer's room focusing on the dialogue and trying to make it as funny as possible, potentially at the expense of a tightly focused narrative. But that wasn't a problem for me, as the jokes kept coming and I laughed consistently hard. I particularly enjoyed it when Ashley has the cheek to blame a country for being invaded.
Well, isn't it kinda sorta your fault for being invaded? You might as well have been wearing a short skirt. Man, those Ukrainians sure have a fucking mouth on them.
This type of edgy humour is what I really appreciated this season, rather than the gross out moments. The Boys' use of satire has always been hysterical to me, especially in the early seasons. It would take swings at all sides, making fun of the current political discourse, but most importantly, it always felt balanced. It wasn't just there to own the libs, or take the piss out of MAGA. It felt like it was taking shots at everyone. But in Season 4, this balanced approach to political satire started to become a little wonky, with more focus on making fun of conservative rhetoric and ideology, and this continues throughout the final season. The series has never been exactly subtle with its parallels between Homelander and Donald Trump, but now they've taken it to a level where it does feel like Homelander is essentially a Trump stand-in. It's heavy-handed and without an ounce of subtlety, so I can imagine that a lot of conservative viewers found the series increasingly frustrating, but I would be lying if I said I didn't find it hilarious. The show has always had a lot to say about our world, and this season is no different. It takes a look at how the public can begin to deify charismatic leaders, with Homelander pushing himself as not only a political leader, but an actual god. It takes a cynical look at how religion can be weaponised to empower a political agenda. So the fact that Trump literally posted a picture of himself as Jesus made it even funnier, and further highlighted the similarities between the two. Going into this final season, the viewers knew that shit was about to go down. With so many people speculating about who would make it out alive, this expectation was supported by showrunner Eric Kripke's own comments, with him saying that there will probably be lots of death, stating, "That's the fun of the final season. You can blow the doors off it. There's no guarantee who's going to survive, because you don't have to keep the cast for another season." And he certainly wasn't lying, as the season flies out the gates with a death to a major character, with Atrian the first casualty. This character has had quite a journey throughout the series. Since accidentally killing Huey's girlfriend Robin in the pilot, he's been a difficult character to work out. He's never been an outright villain, but clearly he wasn't a good guy. He was selfish, arrogant, and only cared about his public image. But as the series progresses, Atrian becomes an increasingly sympathetic character, with him beginning to understand the consequences of his actions. And by season 5, he's fully turned against the Seven and Homelander. After helping the boys escape from one of the freedom camps, Atrian sprints away from Homelander, running for his life. But in a moment that truly solidified his redemption, Atrian chooses to narrowly avoid running into a woman, unlike when he killed Robin, causing him to fall. This allows Homelander to catch him, and he kills him. It's a tragic end to the character, but undoubtedly a really satisfying arc for him that feels fully earned. And by killing off Atrian in the season opener, it was an early sign of what was to come, as numerous high-profile characters meet their end this season, such as Firecracker, who Homelander brutally murders when he begins to have doubts about her. But one of the most emotionally impactful deaths for me was that of Frenchie. Once Homelander becomes empowered by V1, essentially becoming immortal, the boys have few options left, so try to replicate Soldier Boy's depowering ability in Kimiko. But once Homelander turns up, Frenchie makes the ultimate sacrifice, allowing Kimiko and Sister Sage to remain hidden. In a final fuck you to Homelander, Frenchie says, "I bet you've never danced a day in your life," which was a throwback to his conversation with Kimiko all the way back in season 2. This was such a well written scene and a wonderful callback, even though it led to Frenchie's death. As heartbreaking as this was the most beautiful way to write out the character, because Frenchie didn't sacrifice himself to save the world. Although I'm sure that was definitely a factor. But it was his love for Kimiko that was the main driver for his sacrifice. Kimiko thanks him for saving her, and he lovingly replies,
"Monka, you saved me."
And I must say, I found it to be incredibly emotionally effective. It was such a touching moment, performed wonderfully by Toma Capone and Karen Fukuhara. The series finale focuses on the boys' final confrontation against Homelander, who declares himself God during a live Easter broadcast and threatens to slaughter any non-believers. Frenchie's sacrifice is shown to be worthwhile, as Kimiko has successfully developed Soldier Boy's depowering ability, meaning they can finally take down Homelander. As they infiltrate the White House, the boys are intercepted by the Deep and her father. Annie tackles the Deep, causing them to bizarrely fly all the way towards a beach, where she pleads for him to see the error of his ways, but he's too far gone and unable to accept responsibility, forcing Annie to push him into the sea, where he's brutally killed by the sea life, who blame him for the death of Ambrosius and the pipeline disaster. It's a fitting end for such a pathetic character, even though it was entirely predictable. When Kimiko and Butcher make it to the Oval Office, we know that this is it. This is the end for Butcher or Homelander. There's no way both can survive this. And what takes place is a surprisingly low-key final fight, where Butcher is able to restrain Homelander with the help of Ryan. And once Kimiko blasts his abilities away, Homelander is left defenseless. Despite his truly embarrassing pleas, streamed live to the world, Butcher has no room for pity, and he does what needs to be done. This was the perfect way for Homelander to go out, as he's exposed for the snivelling coward that we've always known that he is. But we weren't done there, as Butcher decides to release the virus, knowing that another Homelander was likely to happen. As the famous quote goes, "Absolute power corrupts absolutely." But before he can release the virus, Huey reluctantly shoots Butcher in the stomach, and he dies in Huey's arms. Butcher has always been, in his own words, a complete cunt, but he was a fantastic character, and I've always loved Karl Urban in the role, even with his dreadful Cockney accent. It was sad, but this was a fitting end for the character. As the episode closes, it ties the story up nicely, as we see Mother's Milk get remarried, and he takes in Ryan. Kimiko travels to France with the dog that Hare and Frenchie were planning to adopt, and Huey decides to live a normal life and run the audio store with Annie, who's now pregnant with a daughter, named after Huey's late girlfriend, Robin. What a beautiful close. The finale wasn't quite the epic spectacle that I'd hoped for. Like, I really wanted to see the newly V1 powered Homelander finally let loose and go crazy. But The Boys has always been about the characters, and all the character stuff is really well done. So I'm grateful for that, and ultimately satisfied with how it went out. Despite the season receiving largely very positive reviews from critics, audience feedback, at least online, has been less than stellar, even gaining comparisons to Game of Thrones' disappointing final season. Like, if you take a look at the IMDb ratings for each episode, it's taken a substantial drop since The Boys was at its peak early in the series. And in fairness, whilst I appreciated this season more than most, I do understand some of the complaints. A common point of contention is that there was too much filler this season, rather than focusing on more important story threads. And whilst I think this criticism is overblown, at times I do agree. Like in episode 5 for example, they use a vignette structure to show the perspective from each character, and one section focuses on the perspective of Butcher's dog. Whilst it was amusing, it did feel like it brought the season to a halt and diminished the show's urgency. And did we need this more than some extra scenes with Ryan this season? Or the characters from Gen V, who felt like nothing more than an afterthought all season? And speaking of Gen V, the use of these characters does highlight one of the weaknesses of the season. As anyone who watched Gen V will know, Marie is supposed to be insanely powerful, so it was expected that she would have a key role in this final season. However, she doesn't appear until the penultimate episode, with Starlight telling her to leave, as she won't be much help. Eric Kripke justifies this by saying she's 19 years old. She's no idea how to wield any of it in any sort of responsible, controlled way. Were there to be another season of Gen V, that would be her training with Yoda season, where she really learns how to take the next step. Which, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Well, unless you actually watched season 2 of Gen V, when Marie finally gained control of her powers after being trained by Cypher, even killing V1-powered Thomas Godolkin. I know Eric Kripke wasn't the showrunner of Gen V, but it is kind of important that he knows what went down on that show as well. It's this lack of attention to detail that I do admit can be frustrating as a viewer, and considering we recently found out that Gen V has been cancelled, the egregious use of their characters stung even more. But a criticism that has been frequently aimed at this season that I completely disagree with is that nothing happens. When I see people say this, I feel like, are we watching the same show? It's not a season of action, but a hell of a lot goes down this season. Like episode 7 got really low audience ratings, with some saying that it felt like just another episode, which isn't even remotely true. I mean, let's break it down. Homelander literally kills the president, dissolves the Seven, and murders Frenchie. There's a great fight sequence between the boys against She-Line and Dognot. We get a nice cameo from Jeffrey Dean Morgan, and we finally found out how Mother's Milk got its nickname, which was such a touching, character-driven moment. Yes, the writing this season hasn't always been the strongest, with there clearly being an emphasis on the comedic aspects of the show, rather than focusing on the plot. But for me, despite how brilliant The Boys has been, I've never seen it as a show that you should take too seriously, or really dig into the minutiae of the plot, because the show itself doesn't take itself seriously. This isn't a Game of Thrones or a Stranger Things, where it expects you to be really dissecting the plot. It's a satire. For me, it would be a bit like critiquing the plot of South Park and saying it's ridiculous. Yes, it's uneven, or not everything set up over the course of the series gets a satisfying payoff. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's some really good stuff this season. Writing a satisfying final season is so tough. It's why so many great shows struggle with it. Everyone has their own different expectations for it, so trying to appease everyone is near impossible. But I think if we take a broader look at the season, it does largely work. Because of that, the final season of The Boys gets a thumbs up from me, as it's certainly worth watching. So, what did you think of the final season of The Boys? And what's the best final season of a show that you've seen? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe for more. And I'll see you next time for another video. Goodbye.